Shalom. Welcome to the Chai Academy. Welcome to the Chai Center. We have started a new series. Each class is separate. We've started a new series, and it's called Famous Jewish Personalities. Our last series was on the Holocaust, and yesterday was the first class on Jewish personalities. Yesterday we spoke about Elie Wiesel, Elie Wiesel, Elie Wiesel, and today we're going to talk about another fascinating personality. Hold on to your hats. This is an unbelievable story, and you've heard his name. You probably heard a lot of his story, and it is a troubling one, and something that we must never forget. You know, when we talk about never again, we mean it. Never again means never again. So the person we're going to be talking about today, his name is Leo Frank. Now, one of the reasons why Leo Frank was chosen to be in this series is because the anti-Semitism that we see over the world, in the United States, in New York, in Brooklyn, in Times Square, in LA, in Kentucky, in Montreal, Toronto, is appalling. Is appalling. And you know, the beatings in Times Square is just horrific. In LA, horrific. Leo Frank was a victim of anti-Semitism, but to the nth degree. Leo Frank was born in I think he was born in Texas, and then at an early age he moved to New York. He was born in 1884, I think, and anyway, he was in New York. He went to the New York public system. He went to Pratt Institute, and he came out with a degree from Cornell, and it was a mechanical engineer. In 1908, he moved to Atlanta. And the reason why he moved to Atlanta, because he had a relative who was an investor at a pencil factory. And I believe it was an uncle. And his uncle said, look, I'm an investor. I can get you a nice paying job. So he went to the pencil factory, and there he became a manager. He was not the owner. He was the manager of a pencil factory where he made about $180 a month, which in 1908 was a tremendous amount of money. It was a good paying job. And so he moved to Atlanta. There was probably about 3,000 Jews living in Atlanta then. And he was elected president, you know, a dapper New Yorker making a lot of money. I think a lot of the Jews in Atlanta, in down south, I think made a lot of money. Business owners, etc. Anyway, so in 1910 he was elected president to the B'nai B'rith, and once again it was called the National Pencil Company. In 1912 he got married, and in 1913, it was April of 1913, a young girl. She was about 14 years old. Her name was Mary Fagan. So it was like the last week in April. I think it was like April 21st, April 22nd. She was laid off. There was there was bad economic times, and she was laid off. And she came a couple days later to pick up her last paycheck. On April 25th or 26th, her body was found in the basement of the National Pencil Factory. Her body was found. She was strangled. There was cloth around her neck. She was it looked like she had been dragged in the mud. She was a white girl. Her name was Mary Fagan. But at first they couldn't even tell because it was dusty and soot and etc. She was strangled to death. She She looked like she had been beaten. Her skirt was lifted up. Her panties were pulled down, and it was clear that she was, and also she was, her legs were bloody, clearly a violent rape as well as a murder. Um, and there was investigators came, and they had their eyes out, had their eyes on a couple of different people. One was Jim Conley, who was a janitor, and there was someone else they had their eyes on, and and then they ascertained, because there was blood found on the second floor, they said that maybe she was killed on the second floor of this pencil factory and dragged down to the basement. So her closest office to where she worked, right opposite her, was a fellow by the name of Leo Frank, the manager. They called him for an interview. They said the police wanted to see him down at the, at the factory, and he came. He was very nervous. He was rubbing his hands together, and right away he was also placed as a suspect. And make a whole long story short, they arrested him. They arrested him. Part of the reasons why they arrested him is because Jim Conley, who was, the other fellow's name was Lee, by the way. Jim Conley, he was. There was a note found by Mary Fagan's body, and the note was written by somebody who was extremely illiterate. And instead of night watchman, the note was written allegedly from her, night witch, spelt wrong, improper English, and so they accused Jim Conley, and they accused him and Lee of doing it together. But Jim Conley was saying that no, I saw Leo Frank with Mary Fagan a couple of days before she died. And then his story got more elaborate. Jim Conley's story got more elaborate. By the way, most historians believe that Jim Conley was the actual murderer. You know, when Leo Frank, when he was brought down to the station, and they accused him, they immediately went to his house. First of all, they checked his entire body. They were looking for scratch marks to see if there's any. They found nothing. They checked his house. And they went through his clothing to see if there's any bloody clothing. They didn't find anything. They did find bloody clothing on Jim Conley, but he said it's rust, not blood. And they never kept the clothing. I mean, anyway, so he was tried, and it was somewhat of a circus. We'll get into that in a minute. It's interesting. A few days before he was arrested, there was a conference about how that child laborers in Atlanta working for Jewish-owned businesses, that it's not right that these Jewish wealthy businesses should employ and exploit children. And one of the strongest voices was a fellow by the name of Rabbi Marx, M-A-R-X, probably a chip off the old block of Karl Marx. He was a Reform rabbi. And he said, Jews, you have to look the part. You have to, get rid of the garb, get rid of your beard, get rid of yarmulke, stop it. And he said, you have to integrate. And he took tremendous umbrage with Russian Jews who lived in Atlanta, who wore who still wore their black kaftans and their black caskets, and et cetera, et cetera. And he said, this is only going to breed anti-Semitism. A few days later, there was a conference about Jewish-owned stores. So there was the ire had been raised, and then this girl was killed. So kind of Marx predicted it. And Conley changed his story a number of times. Finally, Conley said, look, I came into the office upstairs, and there was a dead body there in Frank's office. And Frank offered me $200 to remove her, to take her downstairs. And based on his witness, which was, by the way, inconsistent, he was arrested and he was tried. he was found guilty, and what's interesting is Leo Frank hired an attorney. James Connolly also hired an attorney. James Connolly paid $40 for his attorney. He was a civil rights. He defended black men. Jim Connolly was a black man, and Leo Frank hired an attorney. He hired a private investigator. Now, this private investigator was actually best friends with the detective who was convinced Frank was guilty. So anything Frank told him, anything, was told to this detective. And anyway, so they took a sample of Jim Connolly, a handwriting sample, and sure enough, his note matched and his spelling matched the note that was found by the body. So he said, I wrote it, yes, but I was told to write it by Frank. Once again, the $200, I put the body downstairs. I was supposed to dispose of the body, but I didn't get a chance to. And the note. Make a long story short, James Connolly was sent to 1 year in prison, and Leo Frank was sentenced to be hung, capital punishment, hung from a tree. And it's all because of the blood on the second floor, etc., etc. It was this was a case that basically divided the country. There were Jews and prominent Jews in Atlanta and from around the neighboring area said this case stinks. There's something wrong with this case. A lot of Gentiles, who and as we'll hear, said no, this guy Frank, he's Leo Frank is got to be put to death. He killed a Christian girl and he exploited a Christian girl. He raped a Christian girl, etc., etc. And when he was found guilty, the prosecutor, which is an amazing thing in itself, the prosecutor was placed on when he won. The prosecutor was placed on the shoulders of a mob, and they danced in the streets for a long time. Finally, they got this Jew. They got this Jew as a killer of a young girl. And as I said, Connolly got 1 year. Now here's where a failure happened. They went to the appeals court, and in those days in Georgia, you can appeal you couldn't appeal the sentence. You could appeal that there was not enough evidence, or you could appeal that the evidence was skewed. And they tried, it was denied. They went to the state court of appeals. They didn't hear it. They went to the federal court of appeals. They went to the Supreme Court. Nobody would take the case, and the sentence of death was going to be carried out. Then they appealed to the governor, and they said, look, Governor, this is a case that's skewed from the start. There was so much public outrage. He could not get a fair trial. The evidence is murky at best. They never found anything on him. They never found any blood. They never found and they said there was no proof that he was a womanizer. That's what Connolly kept on saying, that this guy was a sex maniac and he was a womanizer, and he said there's no proof. So the governor, and I remember his name, Slater, something like that. The governor commuted his sentence to life from capital punishment. Now remember I told you they were dancing in the streets? They were dancing in the streets. When the governor commuted his sentence, they protested. The same mob protested outside the governor's house. The governor had to be whisked away from the state of Georgia. There was such outrage that he would commute the sentence. And he actually ended up not being governor because of his bold move of, and the governor actually said something, and it's recorded. He said to friends, he said, I would have pardoned him if not for the, he says, but there's enough for him to get pardoned. So right now I'm going to commute a sentence, and in hopes that more and more evidence will come out, and he'll be. But he was afraid. So the governor said, okay, so for his safety, I'm going to send him to a prison outside of Atlanta, Milchville or Midgeville, or something like that. And he was sent to in July 2015. Six. He was. I'm trying to think of. I think it was 15. He was sent. His sentence was commuted, and he was sent to prison. He was there a couple of weeks, and a prisoner and a fellow prisoner took a knife to him and sliced his throat, cut his jugular, but he survived. And the prisoner said that me killing Frank, I would be pardoned by doing that. Now, because of this whole episode that of Frank going to being sentenced to death and then life imprisonment and commuted life imprisonment, then him being nearly killed, this was the reason why the ADL was founded. Right? I'd love to see the show, Debbie. Send me information, please. So the ADL was founded. It's interesting is the KKK was founded because of this case. So here you had the KKK founded and the ADL founded because of this target against this Jew. So he survived. He survived this slashing. There was a fellow by the name of Watson. Watson had a newspaper called the Jeffersonian. There was a lot of papers in Atlanta. And what's interesting about the papers is that this murder trial boosted the coffers so much that the Jeffersonian, the Atlanta Tribune, the Atlanta begins with a C, I don't forget what it was, Concord or whatever it was. They anyway. And so while the Atlanta Tribune tried to report the facts, this fellow by the name of Watson, who was he remained quiet throughout until it was commuted. Once his sentence was commuted, he went after the Atlanta Tribune, and he said, because it was a politician, it was a competitive paper and a politician, and he went after him. And he said, this guy's a Jew lover. He doesn't care about non-Jews, and he lets these. It says it's all politics because of these wealthy Jews can get away with murder, etc. This fellow Watson, his incitement caused the following horrific, tragic story. He whipped up the crowd so that eventually there were people who decided, and Watson wrote this, that Frank deserves death. So they whipped up, and there was a crowd of 28. And by the way, these names of this crowd, these 28 people, were not released until June 2000. It was kept in secret for all these years, from 1915 until 2000, for 85 years. It was called the Vigilante Committee. It was 28 people. It was comprised of a former governor, a former mayor, a judge, a future Democratic senator, right? And each one, and then there was an electrician there was mechanics, and they have the names. What they did was in August, sometime mid-August, they drove to the prison. An electrician cut the electric. Someone else drained the cars from gas, the prison cars, the warden cars and the prison guard cars. Another person cut the bolt of the fence, because now there was no electric, cut the bolt of the fence. Others came in and grabbed officers and guards and the warden and basically tied their hands and their feet and their mouth. And they kidnapped Leo Frank. And it was a very, very planned out operation. They had watchmen, and it was It was 150 miles away. They decided that they're going to lynch Frank in in um, in where this Mary Fagan lived near her home. So they went to the woods, and what they did was these cars could only go 20 miles an hour, so it took hours and hours and hours. But they had different lookout posts to make sure they're not being followed, and if they are being followed, to cut them off and that whenever a car passed, whenever the entourage passed, then they moved on to the next lookout post, etc. And it was within a short distance from Mary Fagan's house. They lynched him. They took this man, Leo Frank, who, by the way, was a good-looking man, dressed dapper, just like Rabbi Marx wanted, which I think is a powerful lesson in itself. You want to, you want to say, okay, well, I'm obviously Jewish, and if I wear my side locks or my furry hats on Shabbat, and my streimels and my this and my payas and my beard, and it's going to antagonize that nonsense. Frank looked like his Atlanta neighbor. Just complete nonsense. Leo Frank was a secular assimilated Jew. They still lynched him for being a Jew. And we see this time and time again. We see this in Nazi Germany. We see this, a reporter in LA recently, wanted to kowtow to the looting in the summer, and he refused to call it out, even though they wrote "Free Palestine" on synagogues and walls and Jewish stores, and he said, no, it's not true, it's not anti-Semites, it's Black Lives Matters, and he was trying to appease, and then Jews in LA got beaten up. So I don't believe in look, Germany is where Hitler, that was the epicenter of Nazi Germany. And in Germany, you'd be hard pressed to find a Jew with sideburns and beards and kaftans. That was all in Russia and Poland. So it's just nonsense, right? Yeah, they never asked. The Nazis never asked if you were an Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative Jew. They found out you were Jewish, they killed you. They found out you were an eighth Jewish, they killed you. So it's important to point out that Leo Frank was absolutely assimilated secular Jew. So all these people, powerful people, former governor of Georgia, former mayor of Atlanta, right? The driver of the car was not yet, but he became a Democratic senator in the United States Senate. They lynched him. They made sure to lynch him with his face facing the Fagan home. And they took pictures. In the pictures you can actually see the former governor, you can see the former mayor, you can see these people, and they lynched him, and they tied his hands together, they tied his feet together, and they lynched him from a tree. And there's pictures. They sold these pictures as postcards. Right? It wasn't that this was a picture that was handed out clandestinely between one rotten anti-Semite to the other. They sold them. It was a souvenir. And so this committee of 28, and there were a lot of people who witnessed the lynching, and nothing came of it, by the way. Nobody was ever persecuted, nobody prosecuted, nothing came of it. This man just died of the outrage, right? This is in the United States. I mean, there were other blood libels, Bayless, Menachem Bayless, right? And the blood libel, and there was the Dreyfus, whatever his name is. But none of those, France and Russia, they never ended up dying. This guy in the United States, in Atlanta, which, by the way, after this happened, 50% of Atlanta Jews just left. And it created a huge Jewish uproar, but nothing came of it. So his body was dropped off at the morgue, and there was a big uproar by Jews. We want to see the body. They wouldn't let them see the body. Eventually they did. and they saw this poor man was just beaten, and hung by his neck. Um, they brought his body to Queens, and he's buried in Mount Carmel in Queens, which is right off the Jackie Robinson Parkway. And he was buried there. He had a Jewish burial. Interesting to know, this Watson, nothing happened to him either. His coverage, his paper, went from 25,000 to 87,000. That was the punishment that he received, is that he became a millionaire from this Leo Frank's this story and this Leo Frank's lynching. Nothing happened to this bastard Watson. May his bones rot in hell. So hopefully something did happen. Most historians believe that Connolly was the murderer, and that he was the janitor. And witnesses say they saw her hanging around with a black man with a hard hat and a blue shirt, and that's what he wore. But it was never, he was never prosecuted or anything. A witness, an assistant who was a boy to Frank, years later, said that that he could bear testimony about Connolly was hanging around Fagan, etc. It went to years later. We're talking about in there was many attempts, but in 1980 they tried to get him pardoned, and in 1980 they went to the Atlanta Board of Parole, whatever, and they wouldn't refuse to pardon him, and they said, oh, they just lynched Leo Frank all over again. Eventually, they tried a couple of years later, and eventually he was pardoned. But there's a near the lynching site, and it's a government building there. There is a plaque that you can there today. They said, we don't know if he was guilty. We don't know if he was innocent. See, they couldn't even pardon him fully. They had to put this wording, and the wording is, without admitting innocence or guilt, he was a man that was lynched unfairly, and we hereby give him a posthumous pardon. And the government failed to protect him, and et cetera, et cetera. This story will be stuck in the craw, and it's a blight, it's a stain on the Atlanta community, Georgia community for that matter. Very few good people there that really helped. It's a very sad story. Now, what have we learned from it? What we've learned is that a Jew makes a great scapegoat. What we've learned is that if we only leave it up to a government to protect us, then I don't know about you, but in the beating of this kid in Times Square, right? There were a few beatings. In one of the beatings, a cop walked away. He didn't want to, first of all, there's bail reform laws. Secondly, is that if he starts arresting people, who knows if he's going to be fired, lose his pension, etc. We have to be vigilant. We have to, we have to be smart. You can't only rely on the government. It's just not true. And Leo Frank learned that the hard way. Let us, if those who forget a history are doomed to repeat it. You can read about Leo Frank. They made movies about him. They made shows about him, as Debbie Hamman said. There's this books. You can read up. It's a very, very challenging story, and it's hard to believe that it happened in the United States. Be a proud Jew. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to tuck in your Magen David, your necklace, or anything like that, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I think that's probably the most important lesson of all. It does not matter. You be proud of who you are. Head up high. If they're gonna lynch you, take as many going down as you can. That's you know, that's my best advice. Poor innocent man, may his name be remembered for a blessing. Never again.